The routine. Darius Durant was a young postman in the quaint town of Willow Creek, a place where every face was familiar, and every corner held a story. As dawn broke, the town was still cloaked in a gentle haze, the streets empty and silent, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the early morning breeze. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a warm, golden hue over the homes lining Elm Street, where Darius had walked countless times before. His day began as it always did, with the shrill ring of his alarm clock slicing through the tranquility of the early morning. He rolled out of bed, the cool wooden floor sending a shiver up his spine, but Darius was used to this routine. He splashed water on his face, shaking off the remnants of sleep, and stood before the mirror. He adjusted his postal uniform, a crisp blue shirt embroidered with the eagle emblem of the United States Postal Service, and smoothed out the creases, a small act that filled him with a sense of pride. This uniform represented more than just a job. It symbolized his role in the community, a thread weaving through the fabric of the lives around him. After a quick breakfast, a banana, and a granola bar, Darius stepped outside, taking a moment to breathe in the fresh morning air. The scent of dew-kissed grass and blooming flowers enveloped him, invigorating his spirit. As he walked toward the post office, he greeted the occasional early riser with a wave. The streets were peaceful, a stark contrast to the bustling life that would soon unfold. Upon arriving at the post office, Darius exchanged pleasantries with his coworkers, who were busy preparing for the day ahead. He collected his bag of mail and the keys to his postal van, mentally reviewing his route. Each day was a tapestry of connections, letters delivered, packages handed over, and friendly conversations that brightened the mundane tasks of the job. Sliding into the driver's seat of his van, Darius felt a sense of comfort wash over him. The worn steering wheel was familiar under his hands, the faint smell of paper and ink wrapping around him like a warm embrace. He started the engine, the gentle rumble serving as a prelude to the day's symphony of deliveries. As he began his route, the town slowly stirred to life. The familiar rhythm of his day unfolded. Early risers waved from their porches, dog walkers strolled by, and the occasional jogger nodded in acknowledgement. Mid-morning found Darius parked by the side of the road, sorting through his next batch of deliveries. He leaned against the side of his van, the metal cool against his back as he flipped through envelopes and small packages. The routine was so ingrained in him that his hands moved with unconscious precision. As he reached for the next package, a name caught his eye. Mrs. Jane Thompson. A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth at the thought of her. Mrs. Thompson was a vibrant woman in her late 70s, known for her infectious laughter and stories that could warm the coldest of hearts. She had lived on Elm Street for decades, her garden a testament to her green thumb and love for life. Darius remembered how she would always greet him with a kind word and a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. In a job that often felt repetitive, her presence was a breath of fresh air. Eager to see her again, Darius climbed back into his van and set off toward her house. As he drove, he found himself looking forward to their interaction, a highlight in an otherwise predictable day. Little did he know that this routine stop would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his community. Pulling up to Mrs. Thompson's house, Darius immediately noticed something amiss. The usually vibrant garden was overgrown, weeds creeping through the flower beds. It was a small detail, but for someone who had observed her home regularly, it stood out. As he walked up the path, the concrete warm beneath his feet, he noticed a pile of newspapers accumulating on the front step, their edges yellowing from exposure to the elements. Darius pressed the doorbell, the muffled chime echoing inside. He waited, shifting his weight from one foot to another, straining to hear any sound of movement within. Silence enveloped him, stretching into an uncomfortable minute. Concern washed over him as he pressed the doorbell again, this time knocking firmly on the door. "Mrs. Thompson, it's Darius," he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. He frowned slightly when there was no response. This felt wrong. Mrs. Thompson was always so prompt in answering the door, always ready with a warm smile and a friendly word. The absence of her presence felt like a discordant note in a familiar melody. Pulling out his notepad, Darius quickly scribbled a note about the package he had for her, slipping it into the mailbox, which he now noticed was overflowing with uncollected mail. The sight added to his growing concern. As he turned to leave, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. Mrs. Thompson's neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, was watering his rose bushes. "Good morning, Mr. Jenkins," Darius called, walking over to the fence that separated their properties. The older man squinted against the sun, his weathered face lined with concern. "Morning, Darius. How are you today?" he replied, pausing in his task. "I'm doing well, thank you," Darius said, hesitating for a moment. "Have you seen Mrs. Thompson lately?" Mr. Jenkins frowned, his expression troubled. "Come to think of it, I haven't seen her in a couple of weeks. Used to see her out in her garden every day." But he trailed off, the worry evident in his voice. Darius felt a knot forming in his stomach. "How long would you say it's been?" "Oh, at least a couple of weeks, I reckon," Mr. Jenkins replied. "Is everything all right?" Forcing a smile, Darius didn't want to alarm his neighbor unnecessarily. "I'm sure it's fine. Probably just visiting family or something." "Thanks for your help, Mr. Jenkins." As he walked back to his van, the weight of Mr. Jenkins' words hung heavily in the air. A couple of weeks without seeing Mrs. Thompson didn't sit right with him. She was always active, always bustling about in her yard, and her sudden absence felt like a void, a disruption in the normal flow of life on their street. Climbing into his van, Darius sat for a moment, his hand resting on the steering wheel, the knot in his stomach tightening. He tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe Mrs. Thompson was unwell or simply chose to stay indoors. But the overflowing mailbox, the unkempt yard, and now Mr. Jenkins' confirmation of her absence all pointed to something more serious. Starting the engine, Darius pulled away from the curb, his thoughts lingering on the elderly woman. He glanced back at her house in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her familiar figure appear on the porch, but the house remained silent and still, its windows dark and uninviting. As he continued his route, the day stretched ahead filled with more deliveries. Yet his thoughts kept circling back to Mrs. Thompson. He had always taken pride in his job, in being a part of the community. It felt wrong to leave her situation unresolved. As midday approached and his scheduled lunch break arrived, Darius pulled into the parking lot of Mabel's Diner, his usual lunch spot. The familiar neon sign flickered cheerfully in the bright daylight, a beacon of comfort food and friendly faces. Normally, this midday break was a welcome respite from his rounds, a chance to recharge. Today, however, the knot of worry in his stomach had only grown tighter. Pushing open the diner's door, the bell above jingled cheerfully, a stark contrast to his somber mood. The aroma of coffee and grilled sandwiches filled the air, but for once, it failed to stir his appetite. "Hey there, Darius," Mabel called from behind the counter, her round face creased in a welcoming smile. "Hi, Mabel," he nodded absently, sliding onto his regular stool at the counter. "Just the usual, please." As he waited for his meal, Darius couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Something wasn't right with Mrs. Thompson, and he felt an overwhelming urge to check on her. The food served in front of him remained untouched, the waitress's cheerful banter fading into the background as he wrestled with his thoughts. Was he overreacting? Perhaps. But deep down, he knew that something had to be done. He couldn't let this nagging worry fester. After all, he was more than just a postman. He was a part of their community, a connector of lives. And it was in moments like these that he understood the true weight of that connection. Finishing his meal in silence, Darius left a generous tip, the thought of Mrs. Thompson lingering in his mind. He paid the bill and stepped outside, the sunlight feeling warmer as he resolved to visit her house one more time before the day ended. Little did he know that his instinct would soon lead him into a situation far beyond anything he had ever encountered before. The threads of fate were weaving together, and soon Darius would find himself at the center of a story that would change not only his life, but the lives of others in Willow Creek forever. Unraveling the mystery. As Darius finished his meal, the lingering taste of uncertainty sat heavy in his stomach, overshadowing the comfort of the diner's atmosphere. The chatter of patrons and the clinking of cutlery faded into a background hum as he replayed the morning's events in his mind. What was happening to Mrs. Thompson? He had delivered mail to her for years, sharing snippets of conversation that often brightened his day. She was more than just a recipient of packages. She was a vital part of the fabric of his daily routine. Determined to act, Darius hopped back into his postal van, the familiar hum of the engine providing little comfort. The sunlight streamed through the windshield, illuminating the dusty interior, but his heart was clouded with worry. As he navigated back toward Elm Street, he kept reminding himself that something was wrong, very wrong, with Mrs. Thompson. The drive felt longer than usual, the distance between the diner and her home stretching out like a taut rubber band. Darius gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles whitening, as he contemplated what he would find when he arrived. Would she be okay? Should he have called someone sooner? The questions buzzed around in his mind like angry bees, each one sharper than the last. Finally, he turned onto Elm Street, the familiar houses coming into view. However, his heart sank as he approached Mrs. Thompson's home. The lawn, once a verdant green punctuated by vibrant flowers, now appeared wild and unkempt. The roses she had tended to with such devotion were drooping, their petals brown and brittle, and the weeds had taken over the garden like a stubborn invader. Darius parked the van, his pulse quickening. The sight of her house, quiet, dark, and seemingly abandoned, only intensified his concern. With a deep breath, Darius stepped out of the van and made his way up the path. The once familiar sounds of birds chirping and the rustling leaves now felt like an eerie silence. As he approached the front door, he hesitated, his hand hovering over the doorknob. What if she didn't want to see anyone? What if he was intruding? But then, the memory of Mrs. Thompson's laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about her garden, propelled him forward. He had to know what was going on. He knocked firmly, the sound echoing in the stillness. "Mrs. Thompson, it's Darius," he called again, his voice tinged with urgency. "I just wanted to check on you." After a few moments of silence, Darius felt a wave of frustration mixed with anxiety. He knocked again, this time louder, feeling a desperate need to break through whatever barrier had come between them. Still, there was no response. "Okay, I'm coming in," he said to himself, more for reassurance than anything else. Darius knew that in situations like these, the worst thing to do was to turn away. He took a step back, glancing around the yard, searching for any sign of life. That's when he noticed the back gate slightly ajar. It was a small detail, but one that filled him with a renewed sense of purpose. Rounding the side of the house, Darius carefully pushed open the gate, the hinges creaking ominously. The backyard was equally neglected, a tangle of weeds and overgrown grass, swallowing the garden furniture that Mrs. Thompson once cherished. The picnic table, usually adorned with potted plants and colorful cushions, lay barren, a ghost of its former self. "Mrs. Thompson," he called out again, his voice rising above the quiet. As he walked deeper into the yard, a knot of dread began to form in his stomach. He stepped cautiously, feeling as if he were intruding into a world that had grown foreign to him. Just then, something caught his eye. The back door, which should have been locked, was slightly ajar. Darius approached it, every instinct urging him to proceed with caution. He reached out and gently pushed the door open, calling out again, "Mrs. Thompson." The door creaked ominously as he stepped inside, his heart racing. The interior was dark, the curtains drawn tight, blocking out the warm afternoon sun. The musty smell of neglect hung in the air, and Darius felt a chill run down his spine. He squinted into the dimness, trying to acclimate his eyes to the lack of light. "Hello," he called, his voice echoing eerily in the stillness. As he moved further into the house, he noticed the disarray: clothes strewn across the living room floor, the coffee table cluttered with unopened mail and old magazines. It was as if Mrs. Thompson had simply vanished, leaving her world behind in a whirlwind of chaos. A creeping sense of dread settled over Darius. He ventured deeper into the house, pushing open the door to the kitchen. There he found the remnants of a half-eaten meal on the table, the plates still untouched, as if someone had abruptly left the scene. The sink was piled high with dirty dishes, and the garbage can overflowed with refuse. "Mrs. Thompson," Darius called out again, his voice now tinged with concern. There was no response. He felt as if he were wandering through a ghost town, every creak of the floorboards amplifying his anxiety. Just as he was about to turn back, he heard a faint noise coming from the direction of the bedroom. A soft whimper, almost inaudible. His heart raced as he followed the sound, approaching the closed door of the bedroom. Darius knocked gently, his hand trembling slightly. "Mrs. Thompson." "It's Darius. I'm coming in." He pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. The sight before him stole the breath from his lungs. Mrs. Thompson lay curled up on the bed, her frail form partially hidden under a blanket. Her silver hair was unkempt, and her skin appeared pallid, a stark contrast to the vibrant woman he had known. "Mrs. Thompson." Darius rushed to her side, kneeling beside the bed. "What happened? Are you okay?" She stirred slightly at the sound of his voice, her eyes fluttering open. Confusion washed over her face as she focused on him. "Darius?" she croaked, her voice weak and fragile. "What are you doing here?" "I was worried about you," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the fear bubbling within him. "I hadn't seen you for a while, and I just wanted to check on you. You've missed so many deliveries, and your yard." "Oh dear," she interrupted softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I didn't mean to worry anyone. I've been feeling so unwell. I didn't want to burden anyone." His heart ached for her as he took her frail hand in his. "You're not a burden, Mrs. Thompson. We care about you. I care about you. You shouldn't have to go through this alone." With a trembling hand, she wiped at her eyes, the realization of her situation dawning on her. "I just felt so tired, and then, I suppose I lost track of time," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could manage it on my own, but—" Darius shook his head, feeling a surge of determination. "No more of that. You need help. I'm going to call for someone right now." Before she could protest, he pulled out his phone, dialing 911 with a sense of urgency. He explained the situation to the operator, his heart racing as he relayed the details. After he hung up, he turned back to Mrs. Thompson, who was watching him with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Help is on the way," he reassured her. "You're not alone anymore." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she grasped his hand tightly. "Thank you, Darius. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to check on me." He smiled softly, feeling a sense of warmth spread through him. "You've always checked on me, Mrs. Thompson. It's my turn now." As they sat together in the dim light of the room, Darius found himself overwhelmed by a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about delivering mail. It was about being there for one another, about recognizing the signs of someone in distress and taking action. He had stumbled into this situation, yes, but he realized now that he was meant to be here, to help her when she needed it most. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder as they approached. Darius stood, giving Mrs. Thompson's hand one last reassuring squeeze before he moved toward the front door to greet the paramedics. The weight of the situation felt heavy in the air, but he was determined to see it through. As the emergency responders arrived, he led them to the bedroom, explaining Mrs. Thompson's condition. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking her vitals and preparing to assist her. Darius stood by, a mix of relief and anxiety swirling within him. "Don't worry, Mrs. Thompson," he said, kneeling beside her once more. "You're in good hands. They're going to take care of you." Her gaze held his, and for a moment, the world outside faded away. In that brief silence, Darius felt a deep connection to the elderly woman, a bond forged through kindness and compassion. As the paramedics carefully helped her onto a stretcher, he couldn't help but feel that this moment marked a turning point. Not just for Mrs. Thompson, but for himself as well. He had taken a risk, stepping outside of his routine, and in doing so, he had discovered something profound about his role in the community. As they wheeled her out of the house and into the waiting ambulance, Darius felt a surge of hope. He wasn't just a postman. He was a lifeline, a thread connecting lives in ways he had never fully understood. And as he watched the ambulance pull away, a new resolve took root in his heart. He would not only be there for Mrs. Thompson in her time of need, he would look out for the other residents of Willow Creek as well. This was just the beginning of a journey that would lead him to forge deeper connections, to ensure that no one else felt isolated or forgotten in their own homes. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the town, Darius knew that the days ahead would be filled with challenges and triumphs. He was ready to embrace them, to dive deeper into the stories of those around him, and to remind them that they were never alone. The road to recovery. The sirens of the ambulance faded into the distance as Darius stood in front of Mrs. Thompson's house, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within him. He had walked into a routine delivery that had transformed into a life-altering moment for both him and the elderly woman he cared for. The stark reality of her condition and the palpable isolation she had endured weighed heavily on his heart, but there was a flicker of hope igniting within him. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street, Darius took a deep breath, letting the crisp evening air fill his lungs. He realized that the small town of Willow Creek, with its familiar faces and quiet corners, held stories that were often left untold. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a calling to delve deeper into the lives of those around him, and to ensure that no one else slipped through the cracks as Mrs. Thompson had. Determined to take action, Darius climbed back into his postal van. The familiar scent of ink and paper was comforting, but his mind raced with thoughts of what he could do to help Mrs. Thompson once she was back home. He decided to visit the local community center, a hub of activity that often organized programs for the elderly. Perhaps they could assist in providing care for her once she was discharged from the hospital. As he drove through the quiet streets, Darius noticed the first twinkling lights coming to life in the homes along his route. Families gathered around dinner tables, laughter echoing through the open windows, blissfully unaware of the struggles that could exist just a few doors down. He parked outside the community center, its bright lights beckoning him inside like a lighthouse guiding lost ships to shore. The interior buzzed with life, a stark contrast to the stillness of Mrs. Thompson's home. Darius felt a wave of energy as he stepped inside, the warmth of camaraderie enveloping him. He approached the front desk, where a friendly woman with a bright smile greeted him. "Hi there. How can I help you today?" she asked, her voice cheerful and inviting. "Hello. I'm Darius. I just had an encounter with one of our residents, Mrs. Thompson, and I'm hoping to discuss some options for her recovery once she gets out of the hospital," he replied, his determination evident in his tone. "Mrs. Thompson? Oh dear, I heard she was taken to the hospital. She's such a sweet lady," the woman said, her expression turning serious. "We can definitely help with that. Let me get you in touch with Sarah, our outreach coordinator. She's fantastic at organizing support for folks in need." Darius nodded, grateful for the swift response. As he waited, he felt a sense of urgency coursing through him. Mrs. Thompson was not just a neighbor. She was a part of the community he loved, a person whose laughter had brightened his days. The thought of her being alone, struggling with her health, made his heart ache. He had to ensure she was surrounded by support when she returned. After a few minutes, Sarah arrived, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a warm demeanor. "Darius, I hear you're concerned about Mrs. Thompson," she said, shaking his hand. "You're doing a wonderful thing. How can we assist?" "I want to make sure she has the support she needs at home after her hospital stay," Darius explained. "Maybe meals, companionship, or even help with chores. She's been feeling very isolated lately, and I think having someone check in on her would make a huge difference." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, scribbling notes as Darius spoke. "Absolutely. We can arrange for meal deliveries and a volunteer to visit her regularly. We have a program called Neighbors Helping Neighbors where volunteers commit to checking in on those in need. I'll make sure we prioritize Mrs. Thompson's case. It sounds like she could really use the help." Darius felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thank you, Sarah. I just want to make sure she knows she's not alone." "Of course," Sarah replied, her voice reassuring. "We'll get started right away. You've already taken the first step by reaching out, and that means a lot." After finalizing the details with Sarah, Darius left the community center with a sense of purpose coursing through him. He now had a plan in place for Mrs. Thompson's recovery, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do more. He realized that beyond just ensuring she had support, he wanted to foster connections among other residents in the community, bridging gaps that might lead to isolation or neglect. With that thought in mind, Darius decided to take the next few days off from work. He needed to focus on Mrs. Thompson, but he also wanted to observe the community to see who else might need assistance. He figured he could host a small gathering at the community center once Mrs. Thompson was back home, an event to bring people together, encouraging connections that might help prevent loneliness among the elderly. As he made his way home that evening, Darius felt invigorated. The night sky was painted with stars, a stark contrast to the shadows that had weighed on him earlier. He arrived at his modest apartment, feeling a sense of clarity wash over him. He spent the evening crafting a plan, outlining everything from inviting neighbors to organizing activities that would engage everyone and strengthen community ties. The next morning, Darius woke with a renewed sense of purpose. He brewed a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling his small kitchen as he prepared for the day. After breakfast, he grabbed his notepad and set out to visit some of the elderly residents in the neighborhood. It was time to meet them, to listen to their stories, and to understand their needs. His first stop was Mrs. Baker, a widow who lived just a few houses down. Darius had seen her often during his deliveries, but they had never had a proper conversation. As he approached her front porch, he noticed the wind chimes swaying gently in the breeze, their melodic tones creating a serene atmosphere. "Mrs. Baker," he called out, stepping onto the porch. "It's Darius, your postman. How are you today?" The door creaked open, and Mrs. Baker appeared, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "Darius, what a lovely surprise. Come in, dear," she exclaimed, ushering him inside. The interior of her home was warm and inviting, decorated with family photos and plants that thrived under her care. "I just made some tea," she said, leading him to the cozy living room. "Would you like some?" "Absolutely. Thank you," Darius replied, feeling a wave of warmth wash over him. As they settled into comfortable chairs, he felt a sense of ease. After a few moments of small talk, Darius took a breath, sensing the importance of what he wanted to discuss. "Mrs. Baker, I wanted to ask how you've been doing lately. I know it can be tough sometimes, especially with everything going on." Her expression shifted slightly, and Darius noticed the shadow of loneliness in her eyes. "Oh dear, it's been a bit quiet around here since my husband passed. I keep busy with my garden and cooking, but some days can feel very long," she admitted, her voice tinged with sadness. Darius felt a pang of empathy. "I understand. You're not alone, though. I want to make sure everyone in the community feels connected. I'm planning a small gathering at the community center to bring people together, and I'd love for you to join us." Mrs. Baker's eyes sparkled with interest. "That sounds lovely, dear. I'd love to come. It would be wonderful to see everyone and share some stories." Encouraged by her response, Darius visited several more neighbors, each encounter reinforcing the need for connection in their community. He learned about their lives, their joys, and their challenges, realizing that many faced isolation and silence. By the end of the day, Darius had compiled a list of potential attendees for the gathering. He felt a sense of urgency driving him. This event would be crucial not only for Mrs. Thompson's recovery, but for fostering a sense of community that had started to dwindle over the years. As the days passed, Darius continued to reach out to neighbors, inviting them to the gathering and spreading the word about the importance of looking out for one another. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and the anticipation for the event began to grow. Finally, the day arrived when Mrs. Thompson was scheduled to return home from the hospital. Darius had arranged for a volunteer from the community center to be there waiting for her, ready to assist her with anything she needed. He felt a mix of excitement and apprehension as he approached her house once more, wanting to ensure everything was perfect for her homecoming. As he stood outside, he took a moment to collect himself. The sun shone brightly, and the flowers in her garden had been tended to, their colors vibrant and welcoming. It felt like a fresh start, a chance for Mrs. Thompson to reclaim her space and feel supported. The sound of a vehicle approached, and Darius's heart raced as the ambulance pulled up in front of the house. He rushed to greet them, ready to assist in any way he could. The paramedics wheeled Mrs. Thompson out on a stretcher, her frail frame wrapped in a cozy blanket. The moment their eyes met, her face lit up, relief flooding her features. "Darius," she exclaimed, her voice filled with gratitude. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thompson," he said, a smile breaking across his face. "I'm so glad you're back." With careful assistance, they helped her into her home, and Darius followed closely, ensuring she was comfortable. The volunteer from the community center, a kind woman named Grace, introduced herself, her warm demeanor instantly putting Mrs. Thompson at ease. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson. I'm here to help you settle back in. Is there anything you need right now?" Grace asked gently. Mrs. Thompson looked between Darius and Grace, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you both. I feel so blessed to have you here. I didn't realize how much I needed help until now." Darius felt a swell of pride. "You're not alone anymore, Mrs. Thompson. We're all here for you." As they settled in, Darius couldn't help but notice how the atmosphere of the house shifted. Laughter and kindness filled the space that had once felt so heavy. Mrs. Thompson recounted her hospital stay, her resilience shining through as she spoke about the care she received and her hopes for recovery. "Darius, I've missed the little things. The warmth of my home, the scent of my flowers, and the sound of friendly voices," she said, glancing at Grace. "You've both given me so much hope." With Grace's help, they organized Mrs. Thompson's living room, filling it with fresh flowers from the garden, creating a welcoming environment. Darius felt a sense of satisfaction watching the transformation take place, a testament to the power of community. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Darius prepared for the gathering he had organized. He was filled with excitement and nervous energy, hoping it would be a success. He had invited everyone he had spoken to in the days leading up to it, and he knew that bringing them all together could create a ripple effect of connection and support. As he arrived at the community center, he found the room already buzzing with chatter and laughter. People of all ages filled the space, and the warmth of camaraderie enveloped him. He took a moment to soak it all in, feeling grateful for the sense of community that had come alive. With a smile on his face, Darius welcomed everyone, his heart swelling with hope. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm so glad to see so many familiar faces. This gathering is about building connections and looking out for one another, especially for those who might be feeling alone." Cheers and applause erupted from the crowd, and Darius felt the weight of his mission lift as he realized the impact they could all make together. Throughout the evening, people shared stories, played games, and laughed heartily, their spirits rising with each passing moment. Darius glanced around, his heart full as he watched Mrs. Thompson sitting comfortably in a chair, surrounded by neighbors who had come to show their support. She looked vibrant, her laughter ringing out like music in the air. The evening was a resounding success, proving that connection was a powerful antidote to loneliness. As the night drew to a close, Darius felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. He had set out to help Mrs. Thompson, but in doing so, he had ignited a spark that illuminated the lives of others as well. The sense of community that had been rekindled would continue to grow, and he knew he had played a significant role in making it happen. With the glow of the evening still bright in his heart, Darius made his way home, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was filled with opportunities to make a difference, to ensure that no one else felt alone in their struggles. He was ready to embrace the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead, and he knew that together they could create a brighter future for Willow Creek, one filled with hope, compassion, and the warmth of human connection. Building bridges. As the weeks passed, the sense of community in Willow Creek began to flourish, nurtured by the bonds that had formed during the gathering Darius had organized. The evening had sparked a newfound spirit among the residents, encouraging them to connect more deeply with one another. Neighbors were reaching out, sharing meals, and checking in on those who had previously felt isolated. Darius felt a sense of pride as he observed the transformation unfolding around him. With Mrs. Thompson settled back into her home, she had become a central figure in the movement to foster connection in the community. Darius visited her frequently, bringing her the mail and catching up on her recovery. Each time he entered her home, he was greeted by the fresh flowers she had taken to arranging, their vibrant colors a testament to her resilience and spirit. "Darius, you won't believe what I've started doing," Mrs. Thompson exclaimed one afternoon as they sat together on her porch, a warm breeze rustling the leaves of the trees surrounding her home. "What's that?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I've started a book club with some of the neighbors. We meet every Tuesday afternoon to discuss a different book. It's wonderful to see everyone come together, sharing their thoughts and experiences," she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. Darius felt a swell of joy at her words. "That's fantastic. You're really bringing everyone together, Mrs. Thompson." "Oh, it's not just me," she replied, waving her hand dismissively. "Everyone has stepped up. The community center even provided us with some resources and a place to meet. We're reading all sorts of genres, from fiction to biographies. It's been a delightful way to connect." The notion of a book club sparked an idea in Darius's mind. If people were willing to come together for discussions on literature, perhaps they would also be open to other forms of connection, like sharing meals or participating in volunteer activities that could benefit the community. Inspired, he made a mental note to discuss this with Mrs. Thompson. "Speaking of community involvement, I was thinking of starting a volunteer day event," Darius said, leaning forward in his chair. "We could gather everyone to work on projects around the neighborhood, maybe clean up local parks, help elderly residents with yard work, or even organize a food drive for those in need." Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened with excitement. "That sounds wonderful, Darius. I can help rally the book club to spread the word. We could even encourage members to bring their friends along." Encouraged by her enthusiasm, Darius began to map out a plan. They discussed potential projects and set a date for the volunteer day, aiming for a Saturday morning when more people would be available. As they brainstormed, the porch filled with laughter and shared stories, a palpable sense of camaraderie blooming between them. The following week, Darius put up flyers around the community center and in local shops, inviting residents to participate in the volunteer day. He was pleasantly surprised by the overwhelming response. People began signing up, eager to contribute their time and energy to improving their neighborhood. On the morning of the event, Darius arrived at the community center early, the sun just beginning to rise and paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. He felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as he prepared for what lay ahead. The space buzzed with energy as volunteers began to filter in, each of them bringing their unique spirit and motivation to the cause. As people gathered, Darius took a moment to address the crowd, his heart pounding with anticipation. "Thank you all for coming today. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to come together as a community. We have several projects lined up, and every pair of hands will make a difference. Let's work together to make Willow Creek an even better place to live." Applause erupted from the crowd, and Darius felt the energy in the room surge. He divided everyone into groups based on their interests. Some would be heading to the local park for cleanup, others would visit elderly residents to help with yard work, and a few had volunteered to organize a food drive for the community pantry. As the volunteers set off to their designated areas, Darius felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment wash over him. He joined the group headed to the park, armed with trash bags and gloves. The morning was bright, the air filled with laughter and chatter as they worked side by side, united in a shared goal. Darius found himself deep in conversation with Mrs. Baker, who had joined him in picking up litter. "You know, Darius, I've never felt this connected to my neighbors before," she said, her hands busy as she reached for a discarded plastic bottle. "It's as if we're all discovering a part of ourselves we didn't know we were missing." "I completely agree," Darius replied, smiling. "There's something powerful about coming together for a common cause. It reminds us that we're not alone in this world." As the hours passed, the group made significant progress in the park, clearing debris and rejuvenating the space. The sun shone brightly, warming their backs as they laughed and shared stories about their lives. Darius felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude as he looked around at the faces of his neighbors, all engaged and enjoying each other's company. Later in the afternoon, they gathered to enjoy a simple picnic, a spread of sandwiches, fruit, and refreshments provided by the community center. Darius took a moment to reflect on how far they had come in such a short time. The isolation that once permeated the town was slowly dissipating, replaced by the spirit of community and connection. While enjoying a sandwich, Darius noticed a group of children playing nearby, their laughter ringing through the air as they chased one another across the grass. The sight filled him with warmth. He approached the children, who were now gathered around Mrs. Thompson, who was sharing stories about her garden adventures. "Mrs. Thompson, you should tell them about the time you grew that giant pumpkin," one of the kids exclaimed, their eyes wide with excitement. "Oh, that pumpkin was a monster," she laughed, her eyes twinkling. "I entered it in the county fair, and it won first prize. But the best part was sharing it with all of you on Halloween." As the children listened intently, Darius felt a profound sense of community spirit enveloping them all. It was a beautiful sight, a blend of generations coming together, sharing stories and laughter, creating connections that would last well beyond this day. After the picnic, they returned to their tasks with renewed energy. Darius moved between the groups, offering support and encouragement, feeling a sense of fulfillment that came from seeing people work together. The park transformed before his eyes. It was no longer just a collection of trees and benches, but a vibrant space filled with the promise of gatherings, laughter, and play. As the day drew to a close, Darius called everyone together for a group photo, capturing the joy of the day. He felt a sense of accomplishment wash over him, knowing that he had played a part in igniting this newfound spirit of unity among his neighbors. That evening, as he returned home, Darius felt a lightness in his heart. The volunteer day had exceeded his expectations, and he couldn't wait to see how this newfound sense of community would continue to grow. He knew they would have to keep the momentum going, perhaps organizing more events that would bring people together, potlucks, game nights, or outdoor movie screenings. As he lay in bed that night, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The connections he had helped foster were blossoming, and the seeds of community he had planted were taking root. He knew that as long as he remained committed to supporting his neighbors, Willow Creek would continue to flourish. The following week, Darius made it a point to visit Mrs. Thompson and check in on her book club. He was eager to hear about their latest discussions and the books they had read. When he arrived, he found her sitting on her porch, a stack of colorful books beside her. "Darius, you've come at the perfect time," she called out, her smile infectious. "We're just about to start our meeting. Would you like to join us?" "Absolutely. I'd love to hear what you all have been reading," he replied, settling into a chair beside her. As the other members arrived, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. They began sharing their thoughts on the book of the week, a heartwarming tale about friendship and community. Darius found himself drawn into their discussions, appreciating the diverse perspectives each member brought to the table. Throughout the meeting, he noticed how the group had created a safe space for open conversation, where everyone felt comfortable sharing their thoughts and feelings. It was heartening to see Mrs. Thompson take a leading role, her confidence blooming as she guided the discussion with enthusiasm. After the meeting, the group lingered on the porch, continuing to chat and share laughter. Darius felt a sense of fulfillment as he observed the friendships blossoming around him. The bonds that had formed were not just fleeting connections. They were the foundations of a community united by compassion and support. "Thank you for bringing us together, Darius," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice warm with gratitude. "You've created something truly special here." "It's all of you who have made it happen," he replied. "I just provided the spark. You're the ones who are keeping the fire burning." As the afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, Darius said his goodbyes, feeling a profound sense of hope. The community was transforming before his eyes, and he was grateful to be a part of it. Over the next few weeks, the momentum continued to build. Darius organized regular gatherings, ranging from potluck dinners to game nights, each event drawing in more neighbors. The connections deepened, and friendships flourished, transforming Willow Creek into a thriving, caring community. One sunny Saturday, Darius decided to host a Welcome to Summer block party, inviting everyone to bring their favorite dish and join in a day of fun and games. He was determined to make it a celebration of the spirit that had been rekindled among them. The day of the block party arrived, and Darius felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as he set up tables and chairs outside. Colorful decorations adorned the yard, and the aroma of grilled burgers and freshly baked pies filled the air. Neighbors began to arrive, their laughter and chatter blending into a joyful symphony. As the festivities kicked off, Darius felt a wave of happiness wash over him. The sense of connection that had developed over the past few months was now palpable as families gathered, children played, and stories were shared over delicious food. Mrs. Thompson had set up a table for her book club, displaying their latest reads, inviting everyone to join. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood, Darius took a moment to reflect on the journey they had undertaken together. It was heartwarming to see how much had changed, not just for Mrs. Thompson, but for everyone in Willow Creek. The laughter and joy echoed in the air, a testament to the power of community. He knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges, but with each event and every connection forged, they were building a resilient community. Darius had learned that even the smallest actions could create waves of change, and he was committed to continuing this work. As the night wore on, and the stars began to twinkle above, Darius felt a sense of fulfillment deeper than he had ever known. The people of Willow Creek were more than just neighbors. They were a family, united by compassion, kindness, and the shared goal of nurturing their community. With a heart full of hope and determination, Darius looked forward to the future. He was ready to continue this journey, to explore the stories yet untold, and to ensure that every voice in Willow Creek was heard, valued, and cherished. Together, they would create a legacy of love and support, a beacon of light for all who called this place home. The ripple effect. The summer sun hung high in the sky as Darius basked in the success of the recent block party. The joy and laughter that filled the air were palpable, a vibrant reminder of the community's transformation. As he cleaned up the remnants of the day, he couldn't help but smile at the sight of neighbors chatting animatedly, their friendships blossoming before his eyes. It was a heartening scene, one he had dreamed of, but never quite believed could materialize. In the weeks that followed, the energy in Willow Creek continued to thrive. Darius became a sort of community ambassador, frequently visiting homes, organizing events, and fostering connections. He found fulfillment not just in the work itself, but in the stories he uncovered and the lives he touched along the way. Each day brought new encounters, new opportunities to strengthen the bonds that had started to flourish. One afternoon, Darius found himself at the local library, a cozy haven filled with books and warm, inviting spaces. He had come to discuss future events with Sarah, the outreach coordinator, who had become a close ally in their efforts to bring the community together. As they sat at a sunlit table surrounded by shelves of books, the conversation shifted to the impact they were making. "I've been hearing incredible feedback from people," Sarah said, a smile spreading across her face. "Many have expressed how grateful they are for the events. It's like a ripple effect. One small act of kindness is leading to others." Darius nodded, feeling a sense of pride swell within him. "It's true. I've seen people who once felt isolated now volunteering to help others. They're creating their own connections, forming friendships that extend beyond our events." Sarah leaned in, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "What if we took it a step further? How about a community service project that involves the youth? We could engage high school students to help out with our programs and teach them about the importance of community service." Darius's mind raced with possibilities. "That's a fantastic idea. Involving young people can bring fresh energy and perspectives. We could have them assist with our events or even develop their own projects to give back." Encouraged by the discussion, they began to outline a plan to reach out to local schools, inviting students to participate in upcoming events. Darius envisioned a day where children and adults could collaborate, learn from each other, and understand the value of community. With their plan in place, they set off to schedule a meeting with the school principal, excited about the potential impact they could make. As they approached the school, Darius felt a sense of anticipation building within him. He had always believed that fostering relationships across generations was key to strengthening the community. The principal, Mrs. Anderson, welcomed them into her office, her warm demeanor setting a positive tone. Darius shared their vision, highlighting how involving the youth could bridge gaps and empower young people to take an active role in their community. "I love this idea," Mrs. Anderson replied enthusiastically. "Our students are always looking for ways to get involved. I can help spread the word and encourage them to participate in the upcoming events." Over the next few weeks, Darius and Sarah worked tirelessly to promote the initiative. They organized workshops, inviting students to learn about community service, the importance of compassion, and the joy of helping others. Each workshop was filled with laughter, discussions, and a palpable energy that echoed through the halls. On the day of the first workshop, Darius arrived early, excitement bubbling in his chest. As students began to trickle in, he was struck by their energy and enthusiasm. They were eager to learn and contribute, ready to make a difference. "Welcome, everyone," Darius called out, standing before a group of wide-eyed students. "Today we're going to talk about what it means to be part of a community and how you can make an impact." As he shared stories of their recent events and the transformations he had witnessed, he could see the spark of inspiration igniting within them. Darius encouraged them to share their ideas for projects they could initiate, emphasizing that every voice mattered and every action counted. A girl with bright blue hair raised her hand, her enthusiasm contagious. "What if we organize a community mural? It could showcase our town's history and the things we love about it." "That's a brilliant idea," Darius replied, his heart racing with excitement. "Art can be such a powerful medium for bringing people together. Let's make it happen." As the workshop continued, more ideas flowed. A group of boys suggested starting a community garden to promote sustainability and healthy eating, while another girl proposed a pet adoption event to help local shelters find homes for animals. Each idea was met with cheers and encouragement, and Darius felt a profound sense of hope as he witnessed the birth of these initiatives. By the end of the day, Darius knew they had laid the groundwork for something extraordinary. The students left the workshop buzzing with ideas, excited to take on the projects they had proposed. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that these young people would not only contribute but would also inspire others in the community. Over the following months, the projects came to life. The mural team gathered every weekend, armed with paintbrushes and bright colors, transforming a blank wall into a vibrant tapestry of stories and memories. The community garden began to take shape in a vacant lot, and residents of all ages pitched in, their hands working together to cultivate the earth. The pet adoption event turned into a joyful gathering, with families and their furry friends celebrating the bonds of companionship. Darius was in awe of the transformation happening around him. The town was buzzing with life and activity, as more and more residents came together, each contributing their unique talents and passions. What started as a few small gatherings had blossomed into a movement, a collective effort to foster connection and compassion. One sunny afternoon, Darius found himself back at Mrs. Thompson's house, sipping lemonade on her porch, while the aroma of freshly baked cookies filled the air. She had taken on the role of an unofficial community leader, her book club evolving into a support group that encouraged others to share their struggles and triumphs. "Darius, I just received a wonderful letter from the mayor," Mrs. Thompson exclaimed, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "He wants to recognize our efforts at the upcoming town hall meeting. He's impressed by how our community has come together." Darius felt a rush of pride. "That's incredible. It's a testament to the hard work everyone has put in. This is more than just recognition. It's a chance to inspire even more people to get involved." Mrs. Thompson nodded, her smile bright. "We've shown that compassion is contagious, and we can make a real difference when we work together." As the town hall meeting approached, anticipation filled the air. Darius, along with Mrs. Thompson and other community leaders, prepared to present their journey and share their vision for the future. They wanted to showcase not only the projects they had completed, but also the importance of continued engagement and support for one another. The night of the meeting arrived, and the community center buzzed with excitement. Residents gathered to hear about the transformations that had taken place over the past few months. Darius stood at the front, his heart pounding as he prepared to address the crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, looking out at the sea of familiar faces. "We've come together as a community in ways I never thought possible. Each of you has played a role in this journey, and your passion and dedication are what make Willow Creek special." He shared stories of the mural, the community garden, and the pet adoption event. Each tale met with applause and laughter. He emphasized that the true beauty of their efforts lay in the connections they had forged, connections that would continue to grow and evolve. As he wrapped up his speech, the mayor stood to commend the community for their outstanding work. "What you have done here is nothing short of remarkable. Willow Creek is a shining example of what can happen when we come together with open hearts and minds. I am proud to announce that we will be implementing a community outreach program to support these initiatives moving forward." Cheers erupted from the crowd, and Darius felt a sense of joy wash over him. The mayor's commitment to support their efforts solidified the foundation they had built, promising continued growth and connection in the years to come. After the meeting, Darius was approached by many residents who wanted to express their gratitude. He felt overwhelmed but grateful for the opportunity to be a catalyst for change. The stories they shared inspired him to keep pushing forward, to keep advocating for a more connected community. As he walked home that night, he reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. It had begun with small acts of kindness, a determination to make a difference, and a belief that every person had a role to play in shaping their community. The next morning, Darius woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He decided to initiate a quarterly community newsletter, a platform for residents to share their stories, promote upcoming events, and recognize individuals who had made a positive impact. He wanted to ensure that everyone felt valued and heard, fostering an ongoing dialogue within the community. With each newsletter, the spirit of collaboration grew stronger. Residents submitted articles, photos, and stories about their experiences, It became a cherished publication that not only celebrated their achievements, but also served as a reminder of the importance of connection and support. As the seasons changed, Darius witnessed the continued growth of their community. New families moved into Willow Creek, eager to be part of the vibrant fabric that had been woven together. They brought with them fresh ideas and perspectives, contributing to the ever-expanding tapestry of compassion and kindness. One chilly autumn afternoon, Darius stood at the community center, watching children play in the leaves as families gathered for the annual harvest festival. The joy in the air was contagious, and he couldn't help but smile at the transformation that had taken place. Mrs. Thompson approached him, a warm apple pie in hand. "Darius, I can't believe how far we've come. This festival is a testament to the spirit of our community. It's incredible." "It really is," he replied, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over him. "We've built something special here, and it's just the beginning." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the festivities, Darius felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. He had discovered the power of community, the way it could uplift, inspire, and heal. Willow Creek was no longer just a place he delivered mail. It was a home, a sanctuary of connection and support. In the months and years to come, Darius continued to champion the values of compassion and kindness. He organized events, fostered connections, and remained an active participant in the lives of his neighbors. The ripple effect of their collective efforts spread far beyond the boundaries of Willow Creek, inspiring neighboring towns to initiate similar movements of community engagement. As he stood at the heart of Willow Creek, surrounded by the laughter and love of those who had become his family, Darius knew that the journey was far from over. Together, they would continue to weave a tapestry of connection, kindness, and hope, a legacy that would last for generations to come.